So we've just got a microphone there we're just going to pass around. Apparently this room, previously everybody was mic'd up, but there's apparently so much kit out there on previous days. There was endless feedback, goodness, so we're back into just the crude pass the mic around. And there'll be one round for people for questions from the audience. But let me set the ball rolling, if I may. So we've heard a number of different speeches there about a number of different aspects of cloud. And I guess what I want to ask the panel to talk about first of all, there's lots of different challenges out there, aren't there, in terms of how we embrace this. If I could ask you perhaps just to each to sort of give us what do you think is the greatest challenge and how do we actually address it? So Stephen, I guess you've got the microphone there, so why don't you set us off?
Is that on? Yeah. As you might imagine, I'll say one of the biggest challenges is perhaps not the greatest, but the biggest challenge is security and understanding how you secure the data as it moves in and out of the cloud or onto other devices, but to do so in a way that users will actually do it. Because we know that security is good, but I think specifically in this instance, given that a lot of this is being driven by user demand, if we don't make it easy and make it that security process easier protecting data, people will just bypass it.
Thanks. For me, I'd definitely say it's about how you cope with the vast amounts of data that are going to be in the cloud. Cloud is an aggregation, a service aggregation platform. So you're going to be aggregating all sorts of data, and there are great business opportunities when you aggregate that data to be had. And how can you get after those business opportunities?
It's around the data. What cloud enables you to do is have data from multiple sources for the first time really in one place. But if it's structured data, which is about 20%, all the databases formats mean that you can't connect the information together because the layout defines the meaning. And with the scale of data we're talking about, no one's going to do the integration work. On the unstructured side, what you have to do is realize that 80% of the information that the IT industry tends to duck is the unstructured stuff, the emails, the messaging, the video, the audio. And that's where all the interesting information often is found. Now, that's been ignored in previous generations of technology. In cloud, it's going to be in one place. And I think it would be a great shame if in doing the change to cloud, the embracing of this unstructured information also isn't brought together so that you get views of the information that are coherent and consistent across the organization.
For me, it's the network. We make about $20 billion or thereabouts on the new network, and right now we had a tri-core, and that was really fine, and that is doing 22 nanometer, and that's fine. And the next thing is 14 nanometer, and we are looking at all the things there. Everyone wants less power, and they want less power, but they want more performance.
Okay, great. Right, let me pass out into the audience here. I think we've got a roving mic. Yeah, we have somewhere. So, would somebody like to go first, grab a question? Can we just take the question from here, first of all? If you just say who you are, please, as introduction, and then, your question.
My name's Colin Mallet. I'm an ex-BT Labs guy, so I live in Suffolk. And I've founded an SME, which is addressing smart energy. I particularly enjoyed Mike's 10 points regarding the evolution of the cloud, which I fully agree with. I also think autonomy was a great idea. My particular interest is user-centric energy management for smart households. And my particular worry at the moment is that the whole of the rollout of the smart meter sounds a little bit too much like the national ID card. And so really what I'd like would be our friends talking about cloud to comment about how the cloud can help the smart households actually evolve with their own devices, this autonomous method of managing household energy. It quite excites me. There's some big challenges, but it does excite me.
Mike, do you want to go first? You got the microphone?
Well, I'm sure you're more expert on the subject than I am. The only thing I would say is that in the past, government IT has tended to feel that it needs to have a dedicated infrastructure. So, the approach to health data, for example, where, if the most basic ability of GP surgeries to exchange information around appointments and with hospitals would have made a big difference, and yet we ended up trying to put in a whole network and everything. So my sort of first reaction to your question is, if everyone gets comfortable with the idea of cloud and a generic, i.e. internet connectivity model, then it's going to make the ability to get things like this to happen much easier, because you're not going to have to turn everything into a massive infrastructure project to be able to do it on a much more realistic and rapid timescale. So I think if everyone gets more comfortable with the cloud, I think it can only help drive things like the ability to implement, home-based energy management.
Stephen, do you want to?
Well, yeah, actually, the government has been working on this for a number of years on how you aggregate smart meter data into a cloud offering, and working with the energy retailers. And we've been working with 6 of the energy retailers here in the UK and the government, and we've actually created prototypes around how you can put that data into the cloud, how you use that data then to do better user and billing charging. So it's in prototype stage. I know there's a big piece of work that's ongoing. There's, but we've definitely proved that it works.
So we're involved in a number of projects in the U.S., and really the problem that we're trying to solve is encrypting that data so that it can't be attacked and you can't start to understand if a person's in or out of their home. So encrypting the data. And once you encrypt that data, then you can be much more open of where that data moves, whether it's a public cloud or wherever. So I think the challenge needs to be started with how do you protect that data that you can be pretty open on and move pretty quickly on the other side.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'm gloomy. Everyone all around the world is doing a different solution, and I don't think much has happened.
Can I just ask the panel as a follow-up to this? Do you think there's a role of standards in some of this? So, you're right, rather than the single big solution, there's something about some sort of standards that say multiple players can play in this space, or that not really a relevant issue?
Sure, it's definitely a relevant issue, but, no one, I don't think is anything like a global standard.
Mm-hmm. No. Okay, so I'll take another question then. I think there's a hand at the back there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter Grant. I'm the Chief Executive Cloud Apps, and we already integrate to smart meters and take data from tens of thousands through an API. Very simple to do. We're on the Salesforce.com platform. Mike, I'm interested in what you're saying. You slightly alluded it to in your presentation. What you didn't really cover is it's not just a disruptive technology model, it's a disruptive business model. And how are companies like IBM, like Oracle, like SAP, who recognize their revenues quarterly, perpetual mainly, going to move to a subscription-based model, which as a buyer makes it a lot easier to get in? And us as a small ISV, in 2 years, we've now got 220 clients on our platform. We're able to build a world-class technology and brand just because we're using the cloud-type computing technology and the brand of Salesforce behind us.
Yeah, I think the business model question is central. So, if you're a publicly quoted NASDAQ-listed IT company and the model is changing to one where you can't recognize revenue quarterly, you've got a major issue, because basically you're going to take a hit when you start to have to recognize the revenue ratably. And some of the companies are strong enough that they can kind of absorb that without really admitting it. Others are having to sort of stand up and say it's going to be bad, but we're going to come out good. But I think it's even a bigger change than a reporting one. Who's buying from you is key. So the industry is all set up to go and talk to technical people or to talk project people. It's actually often people that have the problem now that are doing the buying. The whole way in which the value chain is set up in the industry is going to change because of the power. So, for example, if you've got an Amazon, so if you had all of those Amazon customers going and buying servers and services and software. Each of those was a negotiation, and sometimes you get a bit more margin in the deal, sometimes you get a bit less, but you could afford to lose every deal. When Amazon go and make that, it's very hard if you're a server manufacturer not to win that business. It may actually be a sizable hit in your quarterly revenue, which means you kind of can't afford to lose it, which means that the margins become lower. And then you get this vicious circle where it's actually, I recently looked at Amazon for something. It was cheaper. They, in effect, are buying the bandwidth at a fraction of what I could buy it. And I'm getting the compute as well. Well, then I'm not going to go and buy a server like I would have done before. So the question that you ask, and there's no answer, you can work this out, you'll make a lot of money, but the change in business model and how some of the great existing companies are not going to make that transition because of the constraint of their public company listing is fascinating. It also means there's an incredible opportunity, because what you've got is large companies that are constrained by their shareholders and quarterly reporting not to do the right thing in terms of transitioning the model, and that will leave that little bit of forest floor with sunlight where a new tree can grow up, and that's always exciting.
The speed and the traction they have over and above companies like yourself, Stephen.
Yeah, well, actually, we do several $1 billion of software as SaaS every year already. Several billion, well over $2 billion of SaaS. And in fact, more than 60% of our revenues are stream-based. We've also recently, beginning of last year, we gave an earnings assessment all the way through every quarter between now and the end of 2015, because we like the idea of having a predictable business model. And we've been delivering against that predictable business model for a long time. So subscription-based to us is absolutely the way forward. If IBM's been in business 100 years, we've seen lots of changes. In fact, computing services were subscription-based 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And, we moved from subscription-based to non-subscription-based, and we're on the process of potentially moving all the way back. Another point that was raised, going on to, if you take the number of contracted, announced contracts with, say, Amazon, Salesforce.com, and Google in the market in just the last 12 months, and you equate that to numbers of servers, that's about 100,000 less servers that got sold in the market. So there's the efficiencies, there's virtualization efficiencies, and those kind of things. So there's a shift in the market. There's clearly a shift in the market. Our point of view, we've got a very broad portfolio. More than 60% is annuity-based of our revenues, and already our software is seeing a shift. Several $1 billion a year is SaaS.
So I'd absolutely echo the point that the movement to SaaS is much easier done as a private company, or you can move much quicker. And we're the largest private security company. And one of the things we like is that we can go at our public guys with a different business model. We believe quicker than they can react because they're public. The other point about the food chain that changes with SaaS is the reseller model, the people that resell software, because they're typically used to paying commission on the invoice value, large invoice value. They've got a whole infrastructure designed to do that. So when you start to be able to you want to offer software as a service, and you want to go through your traditional channel, it absolutely changes their cash flow, their business model, and it's uncomfortable because a lot of these guys are much smaller, and they can be very resistant to getting a SaaS service. And then you have the whole challenge of, do you use them or you don't use them?
Sean, do you want to add anything? Okay, other questions in the audience? Yes, just behind here.
Hi, I'm Graham Curran, CEO of Sondrel. We're a chip design company. One thing that nobody's commented on, which is, I'd like your views on, is network reliability, hardware reliability, and so on. We've seen a lot of issues with companies like O2 and BlackBerry over the last year. We all know our cars break down all the time due to electronics problems rather than hardware problems. Do you see this as a problem for data storage across the internet in the future?
I have two different experiences of this problem. One is I sit on the board of a very large organisation that had its website go down, luckily in the middle of the night. And the technologists walked in and did a presentation to the board, and they said that we'd experienced a 5 sigma event. So it wasn't going to happen again. We didn't need to worry, and that was the official line. Of course, as you can imagine, 4 weeks later it immediately happened again, and we had another 5 Sigma event. And my fellow board members looked at me and said, well, what does that mean, 2 5 Sigma events? And I said, we were about to see a unicorn walk through the door. So the simple answer to your question is the systems are getting so complex that the ability to understand the dependencies and the correlations, and at the risk of getting technical, what actually happened in the situation is there were 2 independent systems, and what they were supposed to do was, in the event of one of them feeling a little unwell, the other one was supposed to take over. What actually happened was that the 2 systems, when one of them felt unwell, started a conversation with each other, rather like 2 people in a doctor's surgery, about how they were feeling unwell, and stopped actually doing their job and spent all their time conversing about how unwell they were feeling. Which, you know, the reality, I think, is that there's a naivety to believe that we can actually control that problem. The other side of the coin is, as I said, Autonomy runs some of the, probably the world's largest private cloud, and we have a phenomenal number of servers, to the point where, you know, every day a certain number of those servers and disk drives just you know, shuffle off this mortal coil and head for heaven. And it very quickly became apparent to us that any model that wasn't built on the absolute assumption that stuff is going to fail all the time wasn't going to work. And so the model that system has is very like a body. So it continually looks around. As soon as it sees that server's gone down, it always has 2 copies, in fact more than 2 copies of the data. It replicates itself onto standard hardware, which keeps getting added. It's very like what happens in a living organism. And it's a very different approach to the issue of reliability. But, you know, you've got 2 ways of attacking the problem. One is what I suspect from what you're talking about, your end of the problem, which is you try and make the stuff fail less often. And that's vital because that's your underlying number. But the complexity is growing at such an exponential rate that the other end of the problem is you have to work on the basis it's always going to fail all the time and have systems that sort of self-heal around that. But probably, given how much of our infrastructure is moving over to this stuff, probably one of the key issues is understanding this model of accepting that we can't make it work all the time.
Yeah. Others like to comment on this subject? Okay. Other questions in the audience? Yes. One here, second row.
My name is Chris Doran. I run an SME in Cambridge. Simple question. Do you think the cloud is an appropriate platform for delivering games in the future? Video games?
Anybody? Yeah, Sean?
I think in China it's already being used. I think it's already being used.
Any other comments? No? Okay, that's only just what prompted the question.
There's a distinction between just playing a game in a virtual server and actually doing the rendering in the cloud and sending that information down. And there's a lot of discussion about whether OnLive as a service is really viable, whether the networks are good enough, and indeed what Sony are doing, acquiring a cloud gaming company like Gaikai.
I think over time it's important that the cloud will do everything.
Okay. Sorry, can I just... Yes, another question here.
Hello, Philip Powell from Paralance. Our companies that we're talking to are looking to the cloud for computing, high-intensive applications computing, rather than buying in-house servers and basically outsourcing it. But they're running their own applications, their own software. And they're fearful of, they don't know what their software is running on. They don't know how quickly it will run and if it will change underneath them. So they're developing their software applications today and it'll be running on another platform next year. So they're hesitant of moving to cloud for that purpose. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think it was kind of mentioned by one of the speakers about in fact, I think it was you, Andy, it's contractual. So the first thing is it's very easy with the cloud generally to test something. So if you decide you're buying some compute from a cloud provider, you can go and run your application very quickly and see what performance you're getting. But then, and this is the bit that's sort of unsexy that no one likes to talk about, from then on it's all about the contractual basis on which you're working with the other party. And you know, you could actually have a whole conference on contracting in the cloud, I'm afraid. It would be a very boring conference, but it would be a very important one. So the simple answer, the beauty of the cloud is they can probably very quickly, with very little cost and effort, try it, see what performance they're getting. And then the other thing is, remember, you don't really care about how many machines it's taking or any of the infrastructure, all the things you'd normally think about, because that's the cloud provider's problem. What you want to say is, I want this level of performance at this price under these contract terms. If they end up running on twice as many machines, that's not actually your problem, as long as you've written the contract the right way.
Anybody else like to comment on this one? Yeah, go on, Steve.
We get into a lot of the conversations, the contracting conversations with our customers, and yes, it's not a very sexy subject. And I think the challenge that a lot of SMEs have is that they don't have enough weight to actually negotiate contracts with a lot of these cloud providers. And then they get a little worried about changes and what implications are there, because they just don't feel like they can actually influence. Certainly large companies do. It's really a challenge of the SME when contracting with cloud providers.
I think there's a lot of MSPs out there who would argue completely differently. They would say, you know, we've got great flexibility in the cloud, we've got great flexible contracts. And, you know, we've been working with a company called Arrow here in the UK, and they've created an aggregation hub for MSPs. That allows them to aggregate lots of different cloud services together in the same place. And it also allows them to aggregate contractual terms and conditions. Because part of the issue with cloud is if you contract with different entities for different services, then you spend your whole time managing contractual agreements with lots and lots of different entities for lots and lots of different services. So what you need is people who are going to aggregate all of that for you. And the good news is there are people out there that are doing that. And they do it for a very, very cheap service. So they're actually aggregating the contractual aspects of cloud in the cloud.
Can I ask a follow-up that could relate to that, and certainly in my mind? So I'd have lots of people pitching up at my door for many suppliers around how easy it is to move stuff around. Yeah, and one of the bits of hype, isn't it, is I've got this workload, it's almost related to I'm unhappy. That's no problem, I can just shift it because it's cloud and it's standard. What's the reality of that? What does the panel think about that sort of claim and hype?
I think for a generic situation, that's not real. Which actually brings us to a point we haven't really brought up about the cloud, which is in reality, there's two classes of things for the cloud. One is completely new stuff, like, let's say for the sake of example, marketing optimization, where it's a new application and it's completely gone. For anything that's not completely new, everything in reality is hybrid. There's always some bit of it that stays in-house and some bit of it that goes outside. So a very simple example of that is regulatory archiving, where typically you have to have software in-house to find the stuff you've got to archive and work out which rules apply to it, and then some of it gets shipped off into the cloud to be archived. In that situation, I think there's a very interesting possibility of load balancing, where because the system's been set up to bridge across, then you can have a situation where, so for example, in the regulatory world, you suddenly get a lawsuit, and the amount of work that's going into the data shoots up by a massive factor. Well, in that situation, because you've got the hybrid system, it's on-premise and off-premise, and they talk to each other, you can very quickly turn on power. But I think the idea of the sort of complete utility moving stuff around is not there yet, although many people will tell you it is.
Others have views they'd like to share? Yeah, Steve?
It really depends what it is. I mean, and I think that's what Mike's just been saying. I mean, it depends on what kind of workload it is. If you're just going to change your email address, move it from one place to the other, that's probably a pretty simple, straightforward thing to do. If it's complex data that might have legal issues around it, around the veracity of that data that you have to keep for legal purposes, then clearly it's not mobile. So there's a whole spectrum out there, and it depends what type of workload it is, and depends what type of service you're moving.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
I think it will get easier and easier, as the speaker said earlier. When you look at 2016, I think it will be easier still.
Okay. I think I saw a couple more hands in the audience there. Yeah, so could you just take the person in the second row there, and probably just in the second row there if we could. And probably got time maybe just for one more question at the back if we can, but we'll see.
Good morning. It's Nick Hunn from Onzo. We're another company in smart energy, particularly looking at some of the data analytics. One of the debates that's going round, I think, in that area is how much SaaS is just a stepping stone towards insight as a service, and whether you agree that's where we're going, and if so, sort of to harp on that point, just how important is data ownership in moving along that route?
Sorry. Can you just repeat the question again?
The real question, do you agree that sort of insight as a service is the ultimate goal, and how important is data ownership in moving down that route?
So beyond SaaS and so on. Yeah.
So you're talking about data ownership as part of SaaS systems?
Yeah, beyond that.
I think it's absolutely crucial, but I think the industry will resist you tooth and nail. Coming back to my investment hypothesis about where I would be investing, I would be investing in companies that in effect, even if it's not legally the case, but de facto own the data. So we were just talking about business models. There are large IT infrastructure players at the moment on 0.3 times revenue. And then you look at Salesforce.com, and God knows what multiple that's on, but it's massive. And the reason is because people think that they're in effect amassing the customer's data and owning it, and it will become very, very difficult to move it. So, I think you're absolutely right to raise this question of data ownership, if that's the bit of the question I got. I think you'll find a very hard time in finding providers that won't actually, in reality, start trying to move it. And it's happening everywhere. Facebook, you're putting up all that information to Facebook. Facebook has the ability to go and mine that and do things which they'll do over time. Apple with iCloud is exactly the same kind of idea. And then you've got a whole series of enterprise players doing it. The argument for signing up these cloud deals at negative margin is to get the data. And then you hope that you can offer services and analytics on the data and make money in the future. So be very, very careful.
Not specifically about the ownership of the data, but the point about insight. I think the whole ability that you now have or can create, especially with unstructured data, is not the ability to get insight, but actually to create foresight. And that's this whole concept of being able to model data to create foresight. So you know what's going to happen as opposed to know what's just happened and then try to model it in advance. And there's lots of very, very great software out there that can do that in the cloud. And, we've invested very heavily in this. I think we've acquired, related to this space, cloud and this space, over the last 5 years, we've acquired more than 220 companies and spent $35 billion doing so, because there's great value in being able to create foresight out of that data.
Sean? Yep.
Beyond my pay grade.
I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up there. It seems a great line to use. So first of all, before I tell you about arrangements just after this, can you just all put your hands together, please, to thank our speakers and the